I'm Abigail Reynolds, 34, and my grandfather's Lakeside cabin was my safe haven growing up. When he left it to me in his will 6 months ago, I never imagined finding my brother-in-law Jason moving his entire family in without my permission. I discovered them literally redecorating my living room while I was supposed to be away on business. The betrayal cut deeper because Jason had already hinted he felt entitled to my inheritance, but I never thought he'd go this far. Before I tell you how I walked in on them painting over my grandfather's hand-carved mantle, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if family drama is your thing. Trust me, this story has more twists than the lakeside road leading to my cabin. The cabin sits on Crystal Lake, a serene body of water tucked away in the mountains about 2 hours from the city. It's not particularly large or luxurious by modern standards, just 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a spacious living area with a stone fireplace, and a wraparound porch that gives you a 180-degree view of the water. But what it lacks in modern amenities, it makes up for in character and memories. My grandfather built most of it with his own hands in the 1970s. The support beams still bear his initials, and the floorboards in the main room creak in a pattern I could navigate blindfolded. Every summer from age 5 until college, I spent at least a month there with him after my parents divorced. He taught me to fish off the private dock, pointing out the spots where bass liked to hide beneath the lily pads. We'd sit for hours in comfortable silence, occasionally sharing thoughts that seemed to flow more easily there than anywhere else. At night, he'd take me stargazing on the small hill behind the cabin. "This is where magic happens, Abby," he'd say, pointing to the constellations and telling stories about each one. The Big Dipper was our favorite. He called it our celestial ladle, always serving up dreams and possibilities. When I got the call 6 months ago that he had passed peacefully in his sleep, I felt like someone had punched a hole through my chest. I was the only family member who visited him regularly in his nursing home those last 2 years. My sister Lauren came occasionally, usually when she needed money or favors, but mostly it was just him and me, looking through old photo albums and reminiscing about those summer days. The inheritance came as a surprise. I assumed the cabin would be sold to cover his medical expenses, but apparently, my grandfather had planned carefully. His will was specific. The cabin and the 5 acres surrounding it were to go to me, who understood its value beyond the material. There was a small trust to maintain the property taxes and upkeep as well. It wasn't a fortune, but it was the most meaningful gift I'd ever received. Lauren seemed fine with the arrangement at first. She and her husband Jason lived in a nice apartment in the city. They had 2 kids, Emma, 9, and Noah, 7, and Lauren worked as a part-time dental hygienist. Jason jumped between sales jobs, never quite finding his footing. He had an excuse for every failure. Bad management, office politics, the economy. Lauren always defended him, insisting he was just waiting for the right opportunity. My relationship with Jason had always been strained. He had a way of inserting himself into family matters that didn't concern him and often made comments about my divorce 2 years ago, suggesting I couldn't keep a man happy. I tolerated him for Lauren's sake, but there was always something about him that felt off, like he was calculating what he could get from every situation. I first noticed his unusual interest in the cabin during the reading of the will. While Lauren hugged me, Jason asked pointed questions about the property value and whether I planned to sell it. I made it clear I intended to keep it and perhaps even move there permanently someday, working remotely for my accounting firm. "Seems like a waste for just one person," he commented, a strange edge to his voice. "A family could really use a place like that." I brushed it off, but the comment lingered uncomfortably. A month later, during a family dinner at my parents' house, Jason brought up the cabin again. "You know, Abby, your grandfather probably meant for that place to be shared by the whole family," he said between bites of pot roast. "Lauren has memories there too." "Very few, actually," Lauren corrected him. I was always more of a city girl. Abby was the one who bonded with Grandpa over fishing and nature stuff. Jason's jaw tightened. "Still, it's a valuable property. In this economy, families should look out for each other. Maybe we could work out some kind of timeshare arrangement." My mother changed the subject, sensing my discomfort, but I caught Jason staring at me throughout dinner with an expression I couldn't quite place. In retrospect, I should have recognized it as entitlement and resentment. After inheriting the cabin, I spent weekends there, slowly making it my own while preserving its character. I replaced the aging refrigerator, but kept my grandfather's collection of hand-carved wooden spoons displayed in the kitchen. I updated the plumbing, but preserved the river stone shower he had painstakingly assembled. Each change was thoughtful, a balance between practicality and preservation. I had plans to eventually renovate the small guest room into a home office, so I could work remotely more often. The city had been feeling increasingly claustrophobic since my divorce from Mark, and the cabin represented not just my past, but potentially my future, a place of healing and new beginnings. If only I had known how quickly Jason would try to steal that future from right under my nose. My accounting firm sent me to Chicago for what was supposed to be a 2-week audit of a major client. I left the cabin securely locked, asked my nearest neighbor, Mr. Peterson, to collect my mail, and headed off with no concerns. 5 days into my trip, I received a text from Mr. Peterson that struck me as odd. "Your family seems nice. Didn't know they'd be staying at the cabin while you're away." I called him immediately. "What family?" I asked, my stomach already nodding with suspicion. "Your sister's family, I think? Man said he was your brother-in-law. They arrived yesterday with a moving truck." I assumed you knew. I ended the call and immediately tried Lauren's cell. No answer. Then Jason's. Straight to voicemail. I called my parents, who seemed genuinely surprised. "Maybe they're just using it for a long weekend," my mother suggested, always looking for the charitable explanation. I knew better. A moving truck wasn't for a weekend trip. I told my supervisor there was a family emergency and booked the first flight home, arriving late the following evening. I rented a car at the airport and drove straight to the cabin, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. As I rounded the final curve of the lake road, my headlights swept across an unfamiliar truck in the driveway, Jason's new Ford F-150 that he'd been so proud of financing despite his questionable credit. Beside it sat a moving truck, just as Mr. Peterson had said. But what made my blood run cold was the pile of furniture on the front porch, furniture I didn't recognize, alongside some of my grandfather's pieces that had been moved outside, exposed to the elements. I parked and approached slowly, noticing lights on throughout the cabin. Through the windows, I could see movement, people walking around as if they owned the place. My place. I used my key to open the front door, half expecting it not to work, but it turned smoothly. The scene inside stopped me in my tracks. My living room had been rearranged. The couch faced a different direction, and an enormous television I'd never seen before dominated one wall. Toys littered the floor and the walls. The beautiful pine walls my grandfather had stained himself were partially painted an awful shade of blue. "Hello?" I called out, my voice surprisingly steady despite the rage building inside me. Lauren appeared from the kitchen, a dish towel in her hands and shock on her face. "Abby, you're supposed to be in Chicago. And you're supposed to not be in my cabin," I replied coldly. "What the hell is going on?" Before she could answer, Jason strolled in from the hallway, wearing sweatpants and looking completely at ease. He barely registered surprise at seeing me. "Oh hey, Abby. Didn't expect you back so soon." His tone was casual, as if he were a welcome guest I'd invited. "Obviously," I said. "Would you like to explain why you're here, why there's a moving truck outside, and why you're painting my walls?" Jason exchanged a look with Lauren before putting on what I can only describe as his salesman smile. "Look, we had a situation. My company went through some restructuring, and I'm between positions right now. The lease on our apartment was up, and this place was just sitting empty most of the time." "You were fired?" I interrupted, cutting through his euphemisms. His smile faltered. "That's not the point. The point is, we needed a place temporarily, and you have all this space going unused. We're family, Abby. Family helps family. You didn't ask." I nearly shouted. "You broke into my home." "We didn't break in," Lauren interjected, looking uncomfortable. "We used the spare key from Mom's house." That explained it. My mother had a spare key for emergencies. I hadn't thought to ask for it back after inheriting the place. At that moment, Emma and Noah emerged from the bedrooms, pajama-clad and curious about the commotion. Emma ran to hug me while Noah hung back, clutching a video game controller. "And Abby, did you see my new room? Dad let me paint it purple," Emma said excitedly. "My new room." The words hit me like a slap. I looked to Lauren and Jason, who had the decency to look slightly embarrassed. "The kids are already settled in," Jason said quietly, a calculated move using the children as shields. "Emma's enrolled in the local school. It's only been a few days, but they already love it here." "How long have you been planning this?" I asked, connecting the dots. "When exactly did you lose your job, Jason?" More uncomfortable glances between them. Finally, Lauren answered, "About 3 weeks ago. We gave notice on our apartment right after." Jason thought. I thought, he interrupted, stepping forward, that instead of paying insane rent in the city, we could live here and contribute to the taxes and maintenance. It's a win-win. The place gets used, and we save money until I land my next position. "Which you didn't think to discuss with me, the owner of this property?" I was struggling to keep my voice level. "We tried calling," Lauren said weakly. "Bullshit," I replied. "My phone works internationally. There's not a single missed call from either of you." The children were watching now, confused by the adult tension. Jason saw my attention shift to them and seized the opportunity. "Look, the kids are tired, and this is a lot to process," he said reasonably. "Why don't you stay in the guest room tonight, and we can discuss this properly in the morning. I'm sure we can work something out that benefits everyone." The audacity of him offering me a room in my own cabin made my vision blur with rage. "No," I said firmly. "This isn't a negotiation. This is my property. You had no right to move in here, make changes, or enroll your children in school using this address. I want you all out by tomorrow afternoon." Lauren's eyes filled with tears. "Abby, please. We have nowhere else to go right now. Jason's severance won't cover a security deposit on a new place until his next job comes through." "Not my problem," I said, hating how cold I sounded, but knowing I needed to stand firm. "You should have thought of that before essentially breaking into my home and redecorating without permission. You're really going to put your own sister and her kids out on the street?" Jason asked loudly, his tone shifting to indignant. "All because you want to keep this big place to yourself? That's incredibly selfish, Abby, even for you." And there it was. The manipulation tactic I'd seen him use on Lauren countless times, now directed at me. Make the reasonable person feel unreasonable. Turn the victim into the villain. "I'm leaving for tonight," I said, ignoring his bait. "I'll be back tomorrow at noon. If you're not packed and ready to leave, I'll call the sheriff." I turned and walked out, even as Lauren called after me and the children looked on in confusion. In my car, I finally let the tears come. Not just from anger, but from the violation of the one place that had always been my sanctuary. The one place that connected me to my grandfather. And now Jason had tainted it with his entitlement. I checked into a motel by the highway, too exhausted and upset to drive back to the city. As I lay awake on the lumpy mattress, I realized this was just the beginning of what would become the most challenging family conflict of my life. After a nearly sleepless night at the roadside motel, I drove to a local diner for coffee and to clear my head. I needed to approach this rationally, despite the emotional nature of the situation. Part of me felt guilty for threatening to throw my sister and her children out, but another part, the part that remembered my grandfather's face when he showed me the deed to the cabin on my 21st birthday, was resolute. "One day this will be yours, Abby," he'd said. "Not because you're my only grandchild who cares about it, but because you're the only one who sees it as more than property." By 11:30 a.m., I'd drafted a compromise in my mind. I would give them 2 weeks to find alternative arrangements. I'd even offer to help with a security deposit on a new apartment if necessary. That seemed reasonable while still establishing clear boundaries. I pulled into the cabin's driveway at precisely noon, noticing immediately that the moving truck was gone. For a moment, I felt relieved, thinking they had taken my deadline seriously and left. But Jason's truck was still there, and so was Lauren's sedan. I approached the front door and inserted my key. It didn't turn. Frowning, I tried again, jiggling it slightly as sometimes the lock stuck in humid weather. Nothing. With dawning comprehension, I realized they had changed the locks. I knocked loudly, then pounded when there was no immediate answer. Finally, Lauren opened the door, looking tired and nervous. "Why doesn't my key work?" I demanded without preamble. She stepped aside to let me in, avoiding my eyes. "Jason thought it would be safer to change the locks. Since, you were so upset yesterday." "Safer? It's my cabin, Lauren. You changed the locks to MY property to keep me out." Jason appeared from the kitchen, coffee mug in hand, looking irritatingly calm. "Abby, let's talk reasonably. We've decided we'd like to stay through the summer at least. The kids love it here, and it makes financial sense for everyone." I stared at him incredulously. "Did you not hear me yesterday? This isn't your decision to make. And where's all your stuff?" "The moving truck is gone." "We unpacked," he said simply. "Everything's put away." I walked further into the cabin, surveying the damage. They had indeed made themselves completely at home. The living room was rearranged around their enormous television. The kitchen now held unfamiliar appliances. When I walked down the hallway, I discovered my grandfather's study, his private sanctuary that I'd left untouched out of respect, had been converted into what appeared to be a home office for Jason. His computer sat on my grandfather's antique desk. The bookshelves that once held my grandfather's first edition Hemingway collection now displayed Jason's sports trophies and business books. The fly fishing shadow box that had hung on the wall for decades was gone. "Where are my grandfather's things?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "In the shed," Lauren answered from behind me. "We needed the space, but we stored everything carefully, I promise." I turned to face them both. "You need to leave. Now. Today. This isn't a discussion." "And go where exactly?" Jason challenged. "We've given up our apartment. The kids start school here on Monday." "Again, not my problem. You created this situation by moving in without permission." "Actually," Jason said, a smug expression crossing his face, "I've consulted with a friend who practices real estate law. Since your grandfather left the cabin to the family and we are family, we have a reasonable claim to at least partial use of the property." "That's complete bullshit," I snapped. "The will was explicit. The cabin was left to me, not the family." "That's not how my parents remember it," Jason countered. "They seem to recall your grandfather wanting the cabin to remain a family gathering place." "My parents. Of course he'd involve them." "You called my parents?" Lauren at least had the grace to look ashamed. "We needed somewhere to stay last night after you threatened to call the sheriff." "They think you're being unreasonable, by the way." I pulled out my phone. "Let's call them right now and sort this out." To my shock, my own mother suggested I share the blessing of the cabin and allow Lauren's family to stay, just until Jason gets back on his feet. My father, always the peacekeeper, proposed a timeshare arrangement where I would use the cabin on weekends while they lived there during the week. Neither of them seemed to grasp the fundamental violation that had occurred. By the end of the conversation, I felt completely alone in my position, painted as the selfish single woman unwilling to help her sister's struggling family. Over the next few days, the situation deteriorated further. I returned to my apartment in the city and contacted Tom Wilson, a lawyer friend who had helped with my divorce. He confirmed what I already knew: the cabin was legally mine alone, and Jason and Lauren were effectively squatting. However, he warned me that if I allowed them to establish residency by staying too long, evicting them could become complicated. "Don't give them an inch," Tom advised. "And document everything." I drove back to the cabin the following weekend with a formal letter Tom had drafted, giving them 48 hours to vacate the premises or face legal action. I found Jason hosting some kind of barbecue with people I didn't recognize. He introduced me as my sister-in-law who's letting us use the family cabin for a while, clearly establishing his false narrative with the neighbors. When I handed him the letter, he laughed and tucked it into his pocket without reading it. "Family doesn't sue family, Abby," he said, loud enough for others to hear. "Why don't you grab a burger and relax? You seem stressed." Lauren avoided me entirely, keeping busy with the children. When I finally cornered her alone in the kitchen, her eyes were red from crying. "Please don't make this harder than it already is," she pleaded. "Jason's meeting with some promising job prospects next week. Once he's employed again, we can look for our own place." "That's what this letter says," I replied. "You have 48 hours to leave, or I'm filing for a formal eviction." "I'm not kidding, Lauren." She looked at me with genuine bewilderment. "Why are you being so cold? We're family. We'd do the same for you if the situation were reversed." "No, you wouldn't," I said quietly. "And you know it." I left the barbecue and drove directly to my parents' house, determined to make them understand my position. It didn't go well. My mother accused me of lacking compassion. My father suggested I was still bitter about my divorce and taking it out on Lauren's intact family. The conversation devolved into bringing up childhood slights and perceived favoritism. "I always knew you were selfish, Abigail, but this is beyond the pale," my mother said finally. "Your grandfather would be ashamed of how you're treating your sister." That was the breaking point. I stood up, shaking with anger and hurt. "Grandpa left the cabin to me because he knew I was the only one who truly loved it for what it was, not what it was worth," I said. "And he'd be disgusted by how Jason has swooped in like a vulture, claiming what isn't his." I left amid their protests, driving back to my apartment in tears. The family I thought would support me had chosen Jason's manipulative narrative instead. I felt more alone than ever, but also more determined. The deadline in the letter came and went. They didn't leave. Tom advised me to file the formal eviction notice, warning me it could take weeks or even months to complete the process if they contested it. In the meantime, Jason was telling extended family members that I was trying to steal the family cabin that he claimed my grandfather had verbally promised would be shared. The battle lines were drawn, and I was outnumbered but resolute. This was no longer just about the cabin. It was about standing up to Jason's manipulation and fighting for what was rightfully mine, even if it meant being cast as the villain in my own family story. A week passed with no communication from my immediate family. My cousin sent confused text messages, clearly having heard Jason's version of events. My Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister, called to express her disappointment in my selfishness. Each conversation left me feeling more isolated and questioning if I was, in fact, being unreasonable. Then came the anonymous call that changed everything. "Is this Abigail Reynolds?" an unfamiliar male voice asked when I answered my phone. "Yes, who's this?" "I'm a neighbor at Crystal Lake. I don't want to get involved in family business, but I thought you should know your brother-in-law is telling everyone he's the new owner of your cabin. He's applying for membership in the Lake Association and has started some major renovations." My blood ran cold. "What kind of renovations?" "They've got contractors there now. Looks like they're knocking down some walls inside. I just thought you should know, since he made it sound like you'd sold it to him." I thanked him and immediately called Mr. Peterson, who confirmed construction vehicles had been at the property for 2 days. "I thought you knew," he said apologetically. "Your brother-in-law said you'd given him the green light to modernize the place." I was in my car within 15 minutes, breaking speed limits all the way to Crystal Lake. 3 hours later, I pulled into the driveway behind a truck labeled Johnson's Construction. The front door stood open, and the sound of power tools rang out from inside. What I found nearly brought me to my knees. The interior wall separating the living room from my grandfather's study had been completely demolished. Dust covered everything, and workers were installing support beams where the wall had stood. The cabin's careful craftsmanship, the warm, intimate spaces my grandfather had designed, were being destroyed to create what Jason enthusiastically described as an open-concept great room when he saw me standing there in shock. "Abby, perfect timing. What do you think? Opens the place up, right? Much more modern." I couldn't even speak. I walked numbly past him into what remained of my grandfather's study. The built-in bookshelves had been ripped out. The window seat where I'd spent countless hours reading was gone. And most devastating of all, the hand-carved mantelpiece that had been my grandfather's pride, the one with tiny fishing lures and lake creatures hidden in the design for me to find as a child, had been removed. "Where is it?" I finally managed to ask. Where's what? Jason replied, following me into the room. The mantelpiece. My grandfather's mantelpiece. He shrugged casually. Oh, that old thing? We tossed it. It didn't fit the new aesthetic. Something in me shattered. I walked out to the shed, ignoring Jason calling after me, and found it unlocked. Inside was chaos, my grandfather's belongings tossed haphazardly into piles. Many things were damaged from rough handling. The antique fishing rods he'd collected were nowhere to be seen. I returned to the house and confronted Jason. Where are the fishing rods? A flicker of unease crossed his face before he composed himself. We might have sold a few things. They were just gathering dust, and we needed money for the renovations. I pulled out my phone and, with shaking hands, searched a local online marketplace. There they were, my grandfather's prized possessions, listed by user J.R. Winters, Jason Robert Winters. Lauren came in from outside, Emma and Noah trailing behind her. She stopped short when she saw my face. Abby, what's wrong? Why are you here? Your husband sold Grandpa's fishing collection, I said flatly, and destroyed his study. That's what's wrong. Lauren looked genuinely shocked, turning to Jason. You said we were just storing those things. And you told me Abby approved the renovation. Jason's face hardened. We needed the money. And this place needs updating if we're going to live here long term. You're not living here long term, I shouted, finally losing my composure entirely. This is MY property that you've invaded and destroyed. The workers had stopped, watching the family drama unfold uncomfortably. I turned to them. I'm sorry, but I need you all to leave right now. This work has not been authorized by the property owner, me. Jason stepped forward, his face darkening. Don't listen to her. I've contracted your services, and I'll be the one paying you. The foreman looked between us uncertainly. Look, lady, we've got a signed contract with Mr. Winters here. If there's some kind of ownership dispute, you folks need to sort that out first. I pulled out my phone again. I'm calling the police and my lawyer. Anyone still here in 5 minutes will be charged with trespassing and destruction of property. Jason laughed, but there was a nervousness to it now. You're being hysterical, Abby. The police won't do anything about a family dispute. He was wrong. While the local police were initially reluctant to get involved in what they saw as a civil matter, the situation changed when I showed them the property deed in my name, the explicit language in my grandfather's will, and proof that Jason had sold items that didn't belong to him. That's theft and fraud, the officer said, looking at Jason with new interest. And if you're not the property owner and haven't been given permission to be here, that's trespassing. Jason's confident facade finally cracked. This is ridiculous. We're family. She's just being vindictive because her husband left her, and she can't stand to see a happy family enjoying this place. Even Lauren looked appalled at this low blow. The children began crying, confused and frightened by the escalating situation. I felt terrible for them, but couldn't back down now. The breaking point had been reached, and there was no going back. As the police escorted Jason outside to cool off, I sat down in what remained of my grandfather's study and finally let the tears flow freely. Among the construction debris, I found a small carved wooden fish that had broken off from the discarded mantelpiece, one of the hidden treasures my grandfather had created just for me. I clutched it tightly, feeling as though it was all I had left of him in this now unrecognizable space. In that moment of despair, surrounded by destruction, I made a decision. I would fight with everything I had to reclaim what was mine, no matter the cost to family relationships. Some boundaries, once crossed, could never be repaired, and Jason had bulldozed right through them all. The police couldn't remove Jason and Lauren immediately. Tenant laws required proper procedure even for squatters, but they did take a report about the stolen fishing collection and unauthorized construction. More importantly, they connected me with Sheriff Martinez, who specialized in property disputes and evictions. What you need is an emergency eviction order, she explained after I'd shown her all my documentation. Based on the destruction of property and evidence of fraud, we might be able to expedite the process. With Sheriff Martinez's guidance and Tom's legal expertise, I filed for an emergency hearing the next day. The judge, A no-nonsense woman named Judge Harmon reviewed the evidence, including photos of the destruction and screenshots of Jason selling my grandfather's possessions online. "I'm granting the emergency eviction," she declared. "The respondents have 24 hours to vacate the premises. Sheriff, please ensure compliance." Jason wasn't present for the hearing, another mistake on his part, but Lauren was. She sat quietly in the back of the courtroom and approached me hesitantly afterward. "Abby, please," she began, her voice breaking. "The kids are settled in their new school. Could we at least stay until the end of the month?" "I had no idea Jason was selling Grandpa's things or making those changes without your permission. He told me you two had worked everything out." For a moment, I almost wavered. Then I remembered the destroyed study, the missing fishing rods, the lies told to neighbors and family. "I'm sorry, Lauren, but no. Jason has gone too far. You can stay with Mom and Dad until you figure things out." Her face hardened. "They don't have room for all four of us, and you know it." "You're punishing my children for something Jason did." "No," I corrected her. "Jason is punishing your children by putting them in this situation. He made choices that led here, not me." She left without another word, and I felt the final thread of our sisterly relationship snap. It hurt more than I expected. The next day, Sheriff Martinez and I arrived at the cabin to serve the eviction notice officially. Jason's truck was there, but Lauren's car was gone. When no one answered our knocks, the sheriff used her authority to enter. Jason sat alone at the kitchen table, surrounded by beer bottles. He looked up with bloodshot eyes. "Where's Lauren? Where are the kids?" I asked, momentarily concerned. "Gone to your parents," he slurred. "Apparently I'm an embarrassment. A failure. Happy now, Abby? You've destroyed my family." "You did that yourself," I replied coldly. "Sheriff Martinez is here to ensure you leave the premises within 24 hours, per the court order." Jason stood suddenly, knocking his chair backward. "This is bullshit. Your grandfather promised this place would stay in the family. I have just as much right to be here as you." Sheriff Martinez stepped forward. "Sir, I need you to calm down. This is a legal eviction with a court order. You need to begin packing your belongings." "I'm not going anywhere," Jason declared, his voice rising dangerously. "This is my home now. Sir, if you refuse to comply, I'll have no choice but to remove you forcibly and charge you with resisting a court order," Sheriff Martinez warned. What happened next still plays in my nightmares. Jason lunged toward me, his face contorted with rage. "You entitled bitch. You've always had everything handed to you." Sheriff Martinez reacted instantly, placing herself between us and restraining Jason. She called for backup as he continued shouting threats and obscenities. "You'll regret this, Abby. Nobody wants you here. Your grandfather only left you this place because he felt sorry for you after Mark left. Everyone knows it." His words were designed to wound, and they did. But they also confirmed what I'd suspected all along. Jason's sense of entitlement went far deeper than I'd realized. When backup arrived, Jason was arrested for threatening behavior and resisting the eviction order. As they led him away, neighbors gathered outside, witnessing his meltdown. Mr. Peterson approached me afterward. "I should have called you sooner," he said regretfully. "He's been acting strangely for weeks, telling everyone different stories about why he was here." "It's not your fault," I assured him. "Jason is convincing when he wants to be." With Jason gone, I enlisted Mr. Peterson's help to change the locks again and secure the property. Then came the devastating task of assessing the damage. The construction crew had left their work half-finished when the police first arrived, leaving exposed beams and electrical wiring. The hardwood floors were scratched from moving furniture. Walls had been painted garish colors. But the worst damage was to my grandfather's study. Not only had the walls been demolished, but I discovered water damage from a pipe that had been improperly moved during the renovation. Family photos stored in the desk had been ruined. The antique desk itself had deep gouges from careless use. A professional assessment put the physical damage at over $40,000. The emotional damage was incalculable. My parents finally visited the cabin a week after Jason's arrest. Seeing the destruction firsthand shifted something in their perspective. My mother cried when she saw the remnants of the mantelpiece, remembering how her father had carved it over one entire winter. I had no idea it was this bad, she admitted quietly. Jason told us you had approved all the changes. And you believed him over me, I said, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. He was very convincing, my father offered weakly. And with the children involved. I understand putting the children first, I acknowledged. But not at the expense of the truth. Lauren called that evening, sounding exhausted and defeated. Jason had been released on bail, but was facing charges of criminal threatening and property destruction. More significantly, she discovered credit card statements showing he'd been stealing from my parents as well, borrowing their credit card information for months. "I've filed for divorce," she said flatly. "I can't do this anymore, Abby. He's been lying to me about everything, his job, our finances, even conversations he claimed to have with you. I found emails showing he was planning to take over the cabin months ago, right after Grandpa died." "I'm so sorry, Lauren," I said sincerely. "For all of it." "No, I'm sorry. I should have seen through him. I should have stood up to him." Her voice broke. "Can you ever forgive me?" That question hung between us, complicated and raw. Forgiveness wouldn't come easily or quickly, but acknowledging the truth was at least a start. As word spread about what had really happened, other family members reached out to apologize for their rush to judgment. My Aunt Patricia revealed that Jason had approached her about investing in renovations at the cabin, claiming he was a co-owner. My cousin Michael admitted Jason had borrowed money from him too, never repaying it. A pattern emerged of manipulation and deceit extending far beyond just the cabin situation. Jason had been playing an elaborate confidence game with the entire family for years, using Lauren as his unwitting shield. The physical removal of Jason from my property proved to be just the beginning of a long road ahead. But standing in what remained of my grandfather's study, holding the small wooden fish carving I'd salvaged, I felt a strange sense of peace amidst the chaos. I had stood my ground and fought for what was right, even when it would have been easier to give in. Whatever came next, I knew my grandfather would have been proud of that. The weeks following Jason's removal from the cabin were a blur of practical matters, hiring contractors to assess and repair the damage, working with my insurance company to file claims, providing statements to the police for their ongoing investigation into the theft and fraud charges against Jason. Each task was necessary but draining, leaving little energy for processing the emotional fallout. Lauren and the children moved into a small apartment in the city with financial help from my parents. She filed for divorce and a restraining order after discovering Jason had emptied their joint savings account. The family division was painful but unavoidable, with most relatives finally seeing Jason for what he was once the full extent of his deception came to light. My mother called regularly, her initial defense of Jason gradually transforming into guilt and regret. "I should have trusted you from the beginning," she admitted during one particularly emotional conversation. "I was so focused on the children that I couldn't see what was really happening." "We all have blind spots when it comes to family," I told her, finding forgiveness easier than I'd expected. My anger had shifted entirely to Jason, the true architect of the situation. My father was quieter in his reconciliation, showing up at the cabin one weekend with his toolbox and a determination to help with repairs. We worked side by side replacing damaged floorboards, his way of apologizing without words. The cabin itself became my therapy. Each repair felt like reclaiming a piece of what had been taken, not just physically but emotionally. I hired local craftsman Carl Jameson to recreate the mantelpiece based on photographs, though we both knew it would never be exactly the same as my grandfather's work. "We can honor the spirit of it," Carl said thoughtfully as we reviewed the designs. "Maybe add some new elements that represent this chapter of the cabin story, too. Scars can be beautiful if they tell a true story." His words stayed with me, a metaphor for my own healing process. Through persistent online searching and the help of local antique dealers, I managed to recover 3 of my grandfather's 7 fishing rods. The buyers, upon learning they'd purchased stolen goods, were largely cooperative, though one insisted on keeping his fair purchase until legal pressure convinced him otherwise. During the cleanup, I discovered something unexpected behind a damaged section of drywall in the study, a small metal box my grandfather had concealed there. Inside were old photographs I'd never seen, letters between my grandparents when they were young, and a sealed envelope with my name on it. With trembling hands, I opened it to find a letter written shortly before his death. My dearest Abby, asterisk if you're reading this, you've likely made the cabin truly yours at last. Perhaps you've renovated this old study where I've hidden this note. I hope whatever changes you make bring you joy. Asterisk, I've left the cabin to you because you understand something the others don't, that its value isn't in its walls or location, but in the peace it brings and the memories it holds. Some may question my decision or feel entitled to what is yours. Stand firm. Asterisk, remember our nights watching the stars? You once asked me if the Big Dipper was pouring out dreams or collecting wishes. Both, I said. That's how I see this cabin. It collected my wishes and dreams, and now pours them out to you. Asterisk, all my love. Asterisk, Grandpa. Asterisk, I sat on the floor amidst the construction dust and cried, not from sadness this time, but from the profound validation his words provided. He had anticipated the conflict and still stood by his decision. The letter became my talisman during difficult moments in the rebuilding process. 3 months after the eviction, Lauren visited the cabin for the first time. She stood in the half-repaired living room, taking in the changes with tears in her eyes. I didn't realize how much Jason had destroyed until now, she said quietly. I let him convince me it was all improvements. He was convincing, I acknowledged, offering her coffee on the newly rebuilt deck. We sat in awkward silence until she finally spoke. I don't expect us to go back to how things were before. I know I betrayed your trust. But I hope someday we can build something new. The kids miss you. It was a beginning, tentative and fragile, but genuine. We agreed the children could visit the cabin occasionally, with Lauren as a day guest only. Trust would need to be rebuilt slowly, with clear boundaries. My relationship with my parents improved more quickly, especially after they became instrumental in helping the police build their case against Jason. Records revealed he had attempted to take out a loan using the cabin as collateral, forging my signature on the application. It was this discovery that finally closed any lingering questions about his intentions. The restoration project attracted attention from others around the lake. Neighbors who had initially believed Jason's stories now stopped by with casseroles and offers of help. Mr. Peterson brought his grandson to help restore the dock that had been damaged during Jason's tenure. Community rallies around truth eventually, Mr. Peterson noted as we worked. May take time, but it finds its way. Through these interactions, I found unexpected connections. Cassandra Miller, a local artist, helped me create a memorial piece incorporating fragments of the original mantelpiece that couldn't be restored. Brian Hawkins, a contractor who specialized in historic renovations, taught me techniques for preserving the cabin's character while making necessary updates. These new friendships helped fill the void left by the family fracture, creating a support system I hadn't realized I needed. When I mentioned this to my therapist, another positive outcome of the ordeal, she nodded knowingly. Trauma has a way of revealing who belongs in your life, she said. Sometimes the family we choose is more reliable than the one we're born into. 6 months after the confrontation, Jason went to trial for multiple charges including fraud, theft, property damage, and threatening behavior. I testified alongside several family members who had discovered his deceptions. The evidence was overwhelming, and he was sentenced to 18 months in prison plus restitution. Lauren attended the sentencing with me, a silent show of solidarity that meant more than words could express. Afterward, she confessed something that shook me. He wasn't just financially abusive, she said quietly as we sat in my car. I was afraid of him, Abby. The way he would look at me when I questioned him. I started believing I was crazy for doubting him. The revelation added another layer to my understanding of the situation and softened some of my lingering resentment toward her. She had been Jason's first and most thoroughly manipulated victim. As winter approached, I completed enough repairs to make the cabin fully functional again. Many improvements would wait until spring, but the essential character had been restored. I spent Thanksgiving there alone by choice, needing the solitude to reflect on the tumultuous year. Sitting in my grandfather's partially restored study, I reread his letter and thought about resilience. The cabin had weathered many storms over its decades, literal hurricanes, the slow decay of time, and now this human destruction. Yet it stood, perhaps stronger for having been rebuilt with such intention and care. Like the cabin, I too had been damaged but not destroyed. The boundaries I'd established with my family were healthier than the unquestioning trust that had existed before. The new relationships I'd formed were built on honesty rather than obligation. As snow began to fall outside the window, I raised a glass to my grandfather's photograph. "You were right," I told him. Standing firm was worth it. The cabin was mine again, not just legally, but in every way that mattered. And I was stronger for having fought for it. 6 months after the last of the major repairs were completed, I stood on the dock watching the sunset turn Crystal Lake into a canvas of orange and pink. The cabin behind me was both familiar and new, restored to honor my grandfather's vision while incorporating thoughtful changes that made it uniquely mine. The walls in the main living area were back in place, defining the cozy spaces my grandfather had originally designed. The study had been rebuilt with careful attention to its original character, though a new built-in bookcase now featured a secure display for the recovered fishing rods. The mantelpiece, while not an exact replica of the original, carried its spirit with Carl's beautiful craftsmanship, incorporating some of the salvaged pieces into a new design. Outside, a state-of-the-art security system had been discreetly installed, along with cameras monitoring the property when I was away. The neighboring community had formed a more vigilant watch network after hearing about what happened. Mr. Peterson proudly served as the unofficial head of this informal group, checking on the cabin regularly when I was in the city. My life had found a new rhythm, splitting time between my apartment in the city and extended stays at the cabin. My accounting firm had approved a flexible remote work arrangement, allowing me to spend 3 weeks of each month at Crystal Lake. The small bedroom I'd originally planned to convert into an office had been completed at last, with windows overlooking the water providing inspiration during work hours. More significant than the physical rebuilding was the emotional healing that had gradually taken place. Lauren and I had established a cautious but genuine reconciliation. Her divorce from Jason had been finalized, and she'd found strength I hadn't known she possessed, securing a full-time position at her dental practice and creating a stable home for Emma and Noah. The children visited the cabin one weekend each month, their initial confusion about the family conflict giving way to enjoyment of our time together. I taught Emma to fish from the dock, just as my grandfather had taught me. Noah, more interested in technology than nature, nevertheless developed an appreciation for stargazing with the telescope I'd installed on the back deck. Aunt Abby, Emma had asked during their last visit, "Is it okay that I still sometimes miss Dad even though he did bad things?" Her question broke my heart and healed it simultaneously. "Of course it is, sweetheart," I'd told her. "People are complicated. You can miss the good parts while understanding why he can't be in our lives right now." My parents had become regular visitors as well, my father taking particular pride in helping with maintenance projects around the property. My mother and I had several long, difficult conversations that cleared away decades of misunderstandings. She finally shared that her distance from the cabin during my childhood had stemmed from complicated grief after her mother died there, context I'd never known that helped me understand her perspective during the conflict with Jason. "I envied your connection to this place and to Dad," she admitted during one particularly honest conversation. When Jason started making claims about the cabin, I think part of me wanted to believe him because it justified my own complicated feelings. "I wish you'd told me sooner," I said, finding compassion where anger had once lived. "Some truths take time to be ready for telling," she replied, wisdom replacing defensiveness. As for Jason, he remained in prison, though rumors suggested he would be released early for good behavior. Lauren had received several letters from him, alternating between apologies and subtle manipulation attempts. She shared them with her therapist, but didn't respond. The children received carefully screened communications through a family court program, maintaining a connection that their counselor deemed important for their emotional development. The most surprising relationship to emerge from the conflict was with my cousin Michael, who had previously been on the periphery of my life. After discovering he too had been deceived by Jason, we bonded over the experience and discovered shared interests beyond family obligation. His expertise in sustainable building had proved invaluable during the cabin renovations, and we now enjoyed a friendship that extended beyond family gatherings. This particular weekend marked a significant milestone, the first family gathering at the cabin since the conflict. Not everyone had been invited. The guest list was carefully curated to include only those who had demonstrated respect for my boundaries and genuine remorse for their initial judgments. Lauren and the children, my parents, Michael and his wife, and Aunt Patricia would be arriving the following day for a Memorial Day barbecue. I had established clear expectations in the invitations. This was my home, not communal family property, and I was choosing to share it with them as a hostess, not an obligation. To my relief, everyone had responded with understanding and appreciation for the invitation. As the sun dipped below the tree line, I heard footsteps on the dock behind me. Turning, I found Mr. Peterson approaching with a small package. "Evening, Abby. Hope I'm not interrupting your thinking time." "Not at all," I smiled. "Just enjoying the view." "Found something that might interest you," he said, handing me the package. "Was cleaning out my attic and came across these." Inside were photographs from the 1970s, my grandfather and a much younger Mr. Peterson working on the cabin's original construction. In several images, a small carved wooden fish was visible on what would become the mantelpiece. "Thought you might want these for your collection," he said. "Your grandfather was mighty proud of this place." "Even prouder of you, though." "Thank you," I said, emotion catching in my throat. "These are precious." After he left, I returned to watching the sunset, the photographs a tangible reminder of the cabin's history and purpose. My grandfather had built this place as a sanctuary, a gathering place for those he loved and trusted. In fighting to protect it, I hadn't just preserved property, I'd honored his intention. The most valuable lesson from the ordeal wasn't about property rights or legal battles. It was about the courage to establish boundaries, even when it meant being misunderstood or labeled selfish. It was about recognizing that true family supports your well-being rather than exploiting your generosity. And perhaps most importantly, it was about trusting my own judgment even when voices around me suggested I was wrong. Jason had nearly succeeded in his takeover because he'd weaponized family loyalty against me, counting on my reluctance to be seen as the villain. Standing firm had cost me relationships in the short term, but ultimately revealed which connections were worth preserving. As darkness fell over the lake, I gathered the photographs and headed inside. The cabin welcomed me with warm lighting and the lingering scent of pine. Tomorrow would bring a new chapter, family gathering here again, but on terms that honored both the property and my role as its steward. I placed the photographs on my grandfather's restored desk and ran my fingers along the grain of the wood. "We did it, Grandpa," I whispered. "We protected what matters." In the quiet of the evening, I could almost hear his reply in the gentle creaking of the cabin's timbers. "The people who truly love you will eventually understand, and those who don't, well, they were never in your corner to begin with." That night, I slept peacefully in the cabin that was undeniably, rightfully mine. Have you ever had to stand your ground against family pressure when you knew you were right? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Family conflicts can be the most painful kind, but sometimes they lead to necessary growth and stronger boundaries. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life experiences. Remember, protecting what's yours isn't selfish, it's necessary. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I hope it gives strength to anyone facing similar challenges.